Okay, hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of City of York Council's Audit and Governance Committee. My name's Councillor Hollier. I'm chairing the committee this evening. I'm joined on both sides of the table by the other members of the committee, and we'll have a revolving door of council officers and external officers as well. So if I could just ask that officers kind of introduce yourself and your title when you first speak, that'll help everybody keep up. I think we've just got apologies from Mr. Binney, who's our independent member. But are there any declarations of interest? Can't see any. Onto the minutes then. Any comments on the minutes? Does anybody like to raise? No? Oh, I'll sign those later. And then in terms of the action log, any issues anybody wants to raise? Councillor Rose?
Yeah, the action 6869 talks about the Salvation Army draft report being issued in Feb and then the audit completed this month. Is it what's the status? I'm surprised it's taken from August to now, and if it has come into the email inbox, I haven't seen it, but what's the current sitch around that?
If I may, I would suspect that can be addressed by our colleagues from Veritel later in the meeting, because they're here to give a verbal update, which will doubtless include.
Action 74 says TBH instead of TBC. Something for us to pick up in work plan, I think, in terms of when we want that to come back. And then actions 80 and 83 are both outstanding, and I wondered if there was any update we could get on 80 and 83. Page 19 and 20. 80 is the corporate governance team report around internal governance management arrangements, and 83 is the report of the monitoring officer on suggested constitutional changes, but they're both dated 29th of January at the moment in there.
Yes, on 80, I will push to have that circulated by email to the committee, and then we'll bring it back to the next meeting so you've got it physically in front of you. On 83,
yeah, it's listed as the report of the monitoring officer on suggested constitutional changes, but it's actually about the honorary alderman and alderwomen being informed annually.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Has that been?
Yeah. I'll perhaps ask Lindsay to address that when she's up here dealing with other matters.
No worries, thanks.
Councillor Merritt?
Pardon me. A couple of things. Sorry, you belted through the minutes. I just wanted to flag in terms of minute 63, recommendation Roman 3. Doesn't actually, when you read it, it doesn't quite make sense. Noted the outcomes of the IPCO inspection and conduct the fit for purpose review.
The committee will conduct the required review.
Right, okay.
I think it's an extra V that can probably just be deleted.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
A few more colours.
Perhaps say the committee will conduct the review. Wasn't obvious to me who was doing what there. Right.
Any more issues to raise on the action?
Yes. On minute 54, we asked if, and it relates to the action log, an update from the monitoring officer in relation to actions 65, 68 and 87. And that was also about clarification of what's happening to the constitution review.
And the constitution review is essentially a work in progress. It will never finish. So members of the Constitution Working Group were aware that I emailed around last week to indicate there will be some more documents starting to come through. It's very much when I can find the time to sit down and review the documents and then start to circulate them in accordance with the process.
Okay, and in terms
Would
of the
it-
appointment of the
would it be
independent person as well.
Yeah, so Lindsay has provided me an update with that. So it is the advert is presently live, and the advert closes at the end of the month. So we are hopeful that we will get some nice candidates, and we will come back with that.
Okay.
Obviously, I was not on the committee when the Constitution Working Group was first set up, but I would be interested in being aware when it meets and what the agendas are, please.
Okay. Any more issues with the minute? That's all the action log. Just checking if mine have been covered. Yeah. So I think the only sort of outstanding issue is the self-assessment report on the committee, which has been circulated. I guess there's not a specific item on this, but how was that taken forward? Is there a next step or?
So again, that will come back to this committee as an informative for what the committee's view of its own performance is, and perhaps with some suggestions as to how we can help to improve that. But again, doubtless Max can make further comment on that when we get to his item.
Okay, thank you. That's Rose.
Yeah, just I've got a whole chunk on there, but I'll put it in the work plan, but at whatever point is appropriate in the meeting, let's chat about the relationship between A&G and scrutiny if that's possible.
Okay. Any further issues? No. Okay. Move on then to item 5, which is item 4, which is public participation. There are no public speakers this evening. So if we then move on to the polling district and polling place review, which I believe is Lindsay Tomlinson, Head of Governance, if you'd like to join us. And I understand Emma Calvert, who's the Electoral Services Manager, is in the ether somewhere.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Emma is joining us via Zoom link. She's not too well at the moment, so thought it best not to be in the room with everyone. But she's going to provide some of the detail when we go through the report. So if you have me just to introduce where we are. So you'll recall that we came to committee in November last year just to inform you that we were starting the process of consulting on the polling district and polling place review. So the polling district review is statutory. We have to conduct it every 5 years, and we are kind of at the end of the time frame for doing that. We have been through the consultation, and the consultation outcomes are set out in Annex 2. Just to clarify as well, you'll see in the report that it states that we had 53 elector responses, 48 council responses, 4 other responses. That's not people, that's comments. So that will be 48 comments on individual items from councillors and 53 items from members of the public on individual items rather than 53 actual people, just to clarify that. You will see as well at Annex 3 the outcome of the accessibility audit. That was conducted last May. We asked all of our presiding officers working on the mayoral election on the 2nd of May to undertake a accessibility audit, which was coordinated by the access officer. And the outcome of that, I think it's fair to say when you have 120 people undertaking the same audit, you're going to get some differing views and opinions. So we have done a sense check on that, and where there are any issues, we have added a column just to say what the mitigations are and what actions we're proposing to take. So I think most of the comments that were raised, most of the issues that were raised can be mitigated. I know there's some issues with ramps, so we're having new ramps made or changing access somehow. Some can't, with the best will, if there's not a suitable alternative polling station, although we'll do what we can. Some of the major issues, will exist, and we will mitigate as much as we can for anyone that may have issues. We did trial at last year's elections use of a McGonagall reader. You'll be aware of the tactile voting device, which we have available in polling stations. The McGonagall reader is a kind of an automated electronic tactile device. They're very expensive. So what we've done is work with the access officer and the RNIB to interrogate where there may be a need for those at certain polling stations, and that's the approach that we're going to take, is that we'll work on information that we're given to determine where there may be a need for those devices. So we're not supplying every station with them, because that's not proportionate response, but we will target them where they're needed. As I say, Emma's going to go through the detail of the outcome of the consultation and the final recommendations. But I just wanted to clarify for you on the recommendations. This is actually a recommendation to council. Sorry if that's not clear, but it is what your decision tonight will be, a recommendation to full council on the 27th next week, to make those final changes to the polling districts and polling places. I've also added into the recommendation a delegation to the returning officer to make urgent changes to polling stations. As you can imagine, when you get into the last few weeks of an election period, sometimes things happen, and we need to be, aware of that, and we may need to make a last-minute change to a polling station. Clearly, there isn't time to come back to committee and get that authorisation. So we've added in that delegation, which would just be in an emergency situation. We've added in as well that will be done in consultation with the chair and vice chair of the committee and the relevant ward members as well, just to make sure that everyone who is a stakeholder in that is aware of those changes. But that would just be in the most extreme circumstances. If you're happy for me to, Chair, I can hand over to Emma, who can take us through the
Please,
detail.
yes.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to go through a quick summary of the recommendations for the committee to look at. There's no recommended changes to the following wards: Bishopthorpe, Cotmanthorpe, Fishergate, Haxby, Wigginton, Micklegate, Rural, West York and Weldrake. Aiken Ward has minor boundary changes to the streets, and this will enable us to split the streets at junctions rather than like in the middle of a street. In the report, it was admitted that moving 122 Beckfield Lane to AC, and I would like this to be added to the recommendations. And also in Aiken, there was a minor error that 24A was in AD, but it wasn't, it's in AB. BD in Clifton Ward has a new polling place, which is Clifton Community Hall on Evelyn Crescent. And after the report was published, it was flagged that BC would also benefit from voting at Clifton Community Hall. And I would also like this to be added to the recommendations. Drighouses and Woodthorpe has CC and CD merging together, and this will remove the need to use Woodthorpe Primary School as a polling place. And there is a minor change to enable the polling district boundaries to be split at a junction again. YCC in Fulford and Heslington Ward will now vote at Fulford Social Hall. This was brought out in the comments for the review. Guildhall Ward has minor boundary changes to the streets, and so does Heworth Ward. YFC will move to Heworth Without Community Centre, and that's in Heworth Without Ward. GC will move to a new venue, which is York Railway Institute Club, along with some minor boundary changes in the Holgate ward. We've merged HE and HG in the Hull ward. We've reviewed the polling districts for Huntington Parish and merged the YGB and YGC in the Huntington and New Earswick ward. We've also reviewed the split of the polling district YHA and merged the YHA 1 and 2 together, and that is in Osbaldwick and Derwent ward. In Rawcliffe and Clifton ward without, we've managed, we've made the changes to the actual address of Clifton Library and merged YKE and YKF together and made minor boundary changes to the streets again, so we've got them split at junctions. Rural West York ward, we couldn't find an alternative place in Napton village, so we're having to retain the mobile unit there in the car park of the pub there, but we will keep this under review, and if something comes up in the village, we'll go and visit and review it. We've merged YLC and YLD in the Strensville ward, and there's just been minor amendments to the streets in Westfield ward, and that concludes the review.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask then the committee if they have any questions or issues to raise. Councillor Merrick.
Two issues. One is looking at Appendix 3 in terms of the accessibility audit. There's 11 or 12 polling stations where there's no information, and another one where the information's somewhat incomplete. Can I ask what is happening in terms of the outstanding audits?
Yeah, so the ones that had no audit, the team have completed those, so they have undertaken and checked that all is okay. So that was just the snapshot from the 2nd of May, but the ones that were missing have been inspected and determined to be absolutely fine. And don't forget as well, we've had another election since then, so we have we do issue presiding officers with a logbook and ask them to log any issues or any problems with polling stations. So we've interrogated them as well to ensure that there was nothing that we'd missed from those logbooks that also need to be flagged up for the audit.
My second question is on the Guildhall recommendations. Welcome the move of the Moatside Court, but there was a separate request for Portland Street, which basically is just the other side of Gillygate from Moatside Court. But that one's been turned down, and I just wondered about the logic of that.
I'm probably going to hand over to Emma. Emma, did you pick that up?
I did, yeah. I'm just going to look at the review. Was it Portland Street, did you say?
Yes, it's basically the opposite the end of Lord Mayor's Walk, and Moatside Court is on the left-hand side at the end of Lord Mayor's Walk as well. And I can see the case that has been put forward.
I'm just going to search. Portland Street, did you say?
Yep.
Yep.
Whilst you're looking that up, if Councillor Burton, if you ask your question.
Might be.
Right.
Okay. I've got two or three very quick questions. Just wondered, of all the changes been notified to the ward councillors and already, or is this, we're at this stage where
We're not
they're
at that
going on
stage
to
yet,
do that?
that councillor. Yeah.
Okay. And then the one of the sorry, I've just lost my place now. Yeah. So why moving Woodthorpe School to Moor Lane Youth Club and not the church at St James Deacon and Sheringham Drive, just out of interest? I do know that area very well because it seems like a long way to move a polling station.
Again, I'm going to refer
Yeah.
to Emma. She
So
had the details.
she'll have a list of things.
Okay. Did you get that one, Emma?
I did, yeah. I found the Portland Street one. The comments that were made was to move the polling station to an art gallery, but that wasn't a suitable polling place. We classed that as no change. And then I'm going to have to look into the other one.
Okay.
And there was also a comment in Ousley that the polling station was going to be moved. Unfortunately, I thought I'd marked that. That's in Clifton Ward. I think there's a move there, which seemed quite a long way as well.
So for Clifton Ward, so we're proposing, that was one of the amendments that Emma mentioned, which I'll just cover. So we're proposing that polling districts B, C and BD, instead of BD, I think it was going to St Joseph's, we're proposing that it goes to Clifton Community Centre, which is much closer.
Okay.
So that is an amendment to
So
what's in the report.
Yeah. Well, that's very good to hear. And I was going to ask, why hasn't SA been audited? But you've answered that already because you haven't finished the audit.
Yes.
But it seems to have been a very thorough accessibility audit, which is great to
It was,
see.
yeah.
And it's interesting to hear about this device that you were mentioning earlier.
Yes, the McGonagall reader. It's fascinating. I think we've still got it. I think Dave Smith might have it in his cupboard. So if you want to have a look at it anytime, please do. It's brilliant. It's very expensive, but really good device. And we have 2 visually impaired electors in different polling stations. So we had to have someone go and swap it between the 2 on the 4th of July. But both gave really, really good feedback and thought it was excellent. It won't suit everyone with visual impairment. You know, there might be other solutions that people will need, but for those 2 electors, it worked incredibly well.
Yeah. And as the years go on, hopefully it'll become cheaper to produce.
I hope so.
Because that's often the case when something first comes out with accessibility.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
So Ousley is in Rawcliffe and Clifton Without. I'm just wondering, does that change anything?
Emma, did you hear that?
Ousley was one
of the ones
I mentioned.
Yes.
No,
Oh,
it's
right, sorry,
Rawcliffe.
yeah. Yes, that one's covered, isn't it? It was the other one that you mentioned that Emma's looking at the school.
Yeah, it's a large community there, and there are quite a lot of elderly people. In that area. Again, it's personal knowledge of the city. Sorry. Again, it's because there are quite a lot of elderly people there. And I noticed somebody had commented from Ousley about it.
Okay. I'll wait for Emma to come back
Yeah.
and clarify on that one.
Chair, for clarity, that one is listed as Clifton on the list of comments. So that'll be why we're talking about in a Clifton context, because Ousley is Rawcliffe and Clifton Without, but that comment's been listed as a complaint against the Clifton change.
Okay, and they're now scheduled to vote at the Clifton Library.
Clifton Community Centre on Evelyn Court, I think it was. Oh, is that Rawcliffe? Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's right, yeah.
Ousley actually have a community hall themselves. I don't know whether that's be a bit too small.
Okay.
Yeah, so sometimes those public buildings aren't always suitable.
No.
So when we get notification that of a potential new station, we do go in and do a thorough inspection of it. And you know, sometimes it's clearly not suitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. It's not a query about the change to the polling district, just the accuracy of something on the page for Strensel on page 53, where it has Stockton the Forest, number of polling station voters, 1,955. Well, actually, there's only 1,200 people live in Stockton on the Forest in all. There's only 560 houses. So I just wonder where all these extra voters have come from.
Without looking at the register.
Yeah, I think it might be wrong.
We will check on
Yeah,
that. I've made a
I think
note.
just
yes.
I don't think there are that many people who live in Stockton on the Forest, unless a lot of people have moved in and I haven't noticed them.
Councillor Merritt.
Yes, if I could come back about the Portland Street, the request according to the schedule was actually St Thomas's or Theatre 41. Instead, the art gallery was only a further possible alternative. Portland Street will be nearest St Thomas's, and then theatre at 41. Now, I can understand St Thomas's is probably the busiest
Yes.
polling station, but that does still leave potential for theatre at 41, which would be the same as Moatside Court. It's being shifted.
We can take that away and look at it, and then obviously we can make changes if the committee happy for us to do so. We can make that change and before we make the final recommendation to council.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I've got a long list. Briefly, it includes Hopgrove and a whole bunch of other bits and pieces, the Stockton Forest one, so it isn't just Stockton Village, if that answers that.
That was included in my figures.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, massive thanks to the whole team for the huge amount of hard work and the engagement, over 100 comments to have to deal with, and I'm supportive of pretty much all of it. It's good to have all the sensible changes like, Ridgeway and West Weatherby Road voting closer to them in Chapel Fields, Derwentthorpe voting locally. It feels much better than when it first came to us. The tidying up initiatives make sense to me. So 24 and 24A Beckfield Lane, our neighbours, and 155, 159 Boroughbridge Roads, they were grouped by a different street's garden boundaries. So I think it makes much more sense to tidy up this way. Same in Bad Bargain Lane, etc. But Dainsgate, I've just dropped an email around in case anybody has access to it of a little drawing of it. But Dainsgate and Acombe is updating the latest recommendation to move from AC to AD. But what it means is, again, that's kind of aligning on the garden boundaries of who they back onto rather than their neighbours that they are street facing. So I'd suggest that change. It's the only suggestions of change I've got. Great to see the huge number of responses. Amused to see someone saying, filling in the whole thing to say that they're not actually that bothered and they postal vote anyway. It's good to see that when we have had the requested changes that we've made them. So 100% back the Fulford residents who felt Heslington was way too far and moving that back. I backed that change in Woodthorpe because it clearly was damaging children's education. It made sense to move that to the next best thing. A few specific critiques, if you like, that aren't necessarily critiques with the work done here, but Beckfield Lane, Acombe Wards, it has a huge void in local polling station options. Everyone has to travel quite far across multiple different polling districts. Napton next to it has lost its polling station. It's only 0.2 miles from Acombe, but it has to walk or drive 2.2 miles to Rougheth now. And it's just a clear sign of an absence of a good venue near Beckfield Lane or Napton. In Acombe, we actually don't have any community venues that aren't churches. So that's an issue for us to take away on our side. I know that I talked a lot with officers who spent a lot of time trying to look for something that would work in the area and couldn't, but something for us to take away along with all those challenges around building more houses and not amenities. And when it comes back, we can, if we do manage to get buildings, we can always revisit polling stations. So I think that's something to be mindful of. I do still think that merging polling districts to create these mega districts, which are larger than one-member wards, I think that's unwise, but it won't stop me from voting in favour of it. I'm not 100% sure based on the bullet points up front around us having to have boundaries that align with polling with parish boundaries, unless there's a good reason not to, that we would have to have community governance reviews to make some of the changes. But I think it adds a huge amount of weight to the fact we need a community governance review as soon as we're able to. And then there was one point in the accessibility that I just wanted to flag, which was row 80, was from a wheelchair user, a disabled resident, about the Sea Scout station, and there's a large lip after a ramp and stuff, and it basically says keep under review, but I think it would be good to have a more definitive action that's beyond review, but what we can actually do to tackle that. We don't get that many responses from people who find it a genuine struggle to vote, and with the accessibility survey that should be dealt with.
If I can come back on that one, Chair. So a member of the team did go out and have a look, and I've seen the photographs. And so we're going to try and work with the venue to see if we can get that resolved to make it slightly less tricky for anyone to navigate, not just wheelchair users, anyone. I mean, I'd probably trip walking in there. So we've got a couple of years to get those issues ironed out and resolved as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you. And that brings me on slightly to my point, which was going to be about the community governance review, because I think what this does highlight, and particularly in the comments, is the need for that. We've kind of tidied up a lot of the anomalies you get within sort of parish boundaries, but there are still huge confusing messes, particularly in sort of Royal Cliff and Clifton Without and wards like that, which have seen big development since those boundaries were sort of first produced. So I guess, is there a timescale on that?
A community governance review would need a council recommendation to support undertaking one, or we would need to respond to a valid petition that was received requesting a community governance review. So that's the two routes into a CGR, either by a council recommendation or by a valid petition. So I guess it's just, you know, whether we have support from members to go forward with a CGR. But the timescale, so from the start, the clock starts ticking effectively once council has agreed the terms of reference to the review. So there'll be a little bit of work to do to agree, once we know the scope and what's to be looked at, to get the terms of reference, because that's kind of the starting point really, is getting the terms of reference correct. You then start the clock ticking. It's 12 months from getting that terms of reference agreed to taking the final order to full council for approval. That doesn't mean that it has to be effective within 12 months, because you can take the order and say the effective date is, you know, 6 months hence or a year hence. Time is tight for the 2027 elections. If, for example, any new parish councils were to be established, then they would need to be in place on the 1st of April in the year that they're established, and that's for obviously for council tax purposes. So, for example, if we're looking at 1st of April 2027, that's only 2 years away, and I've been through that before, CGR process, and then establishing a new parish council, town council, and it's a big process. It's a lengthy process, so fairly tight timescale really for getting it in for 2027.
Yeah, I mean, the last one we went through, I think, was about 2014, and that reported in
That sounds about right, yeah.
2016 when I was looking at the last one. I mean, I think it would be important to try and get that in before the next set of elections, because then after that,
yes,
then looking at another general election, you know, within a few years, so it's always going to be kind of put off. So whether that's something we can add into the recommendations to council, that's looked at, or whether that's better recommended in a different direction, I don't know.
For this committee to determine whether you'd like that in the recommendation, but it would need to have a separate report through to council to kick that process off. But it's within the committee's gift to make that.
Okay. Any opinions? I'll go with Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess the logistics of it, it would obviously take a huge amount of officer time from within the team, but in a year that theoretically has no elections in it, I suppose. But what other resources? My understanding is it's not a cheap endeavour to go through a CGR, but
yeah,
what does that mean?
When I run CGRs previously, I've always used an officer working group and then supported by a member working group. So in fact, the council has given the member working group the authority to go through the consultation process, but not to make any decisions. And then the officer group will be pulled from all the relevant teams across the authority. So the finance team for council tax implications was a really important one. The communications team, a media team, is a massive input to the process. Others that, you know, GIS, any planning policy, all of those areas that will have some input into the review. In terms of customer, we do a lot of surveys online, which, you know, there's a minimal cost to that. I have stood in many a drafty village hall on a Saturday morning with maps, and, you know, met a couple of people who've come in and shown interest. That's probably the main cost, is officer time in conducting those reviews. In terms of consultation, we can, if you wanted to do a mail out, you know, that would obviously have a cost implication. Again, I've usually combined that with council tax write-up, but we've kind of missed the boat on that this year. We can't do a referendum because that's not a lawful use of the electoral register, so we wouldn't be able to hold a referendum in relevant areas about undertaking a CGR. But there's lots of ways we can do it, and we can do it fairly cost effectively. So I've always worked with parish clerks and parish councils and put things in their newsletters, got the parish councils to kind of spread the word. So we can do it in a, you know, as cost effective a way as possible, but we want to do, you want to make the consultation meaningful. And there's I would say probably 2 rounds of consultation for, if you were going to do a citywide CGR, 2, possibly 3, which reflects how the Boundary Commission would do a local government boundary review. So yes, there's a cost implication, but we could probably look to do it as effectively as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm as I have been in many meetings on this topic, I'm hugely supportive of it. I think it on the cheapest end, we need to do some of these finessing. We've had requests from parish councils for changes. You know, that stuff is pretty straightforward. But I don't think we should do the cheap end, and that's where my concern lies around the logistics of it. Is, you know, we have a two-tier system in the city where some people have extra local finance and support that other people don't, and vice versa. Those in a parish council area have seen the total amount they pay go way above 5% this year, because some of the parish councils have put their fees up by, I think, 37% the highest or something crazy. So you know, both sides of that fence, I think would benefit from a proper thorough review, which may be a slightly more intensive consultation exercise and has more ongoing cost/benefit. But I'd be fully supportive of us at the very least recommending that it gets looked into through a proper report and stuff. I don't know exactly where I sit on the logistics of it because we haven't had a proper paper on it, but it'll be good, I think.
Yeah, and I think the scope is the next, is it a good idea to have something, and then the scope of it can, as you say, would be the next step. Councillor Burton and then Councillor Coles.
Just a couple of things. Any consultation or whatever that to cut costs, it mustn't rule out, it must be wary of digital exclusion.
Absolutely.
But, and I know that you are aware of that, but I think people are just assuming that everybody has the internet when everybody doesn't, for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes for older people don't have it because they just can't use it, or they might not be able to afford it, and even younger people can't necessarily afford it to go online, and not everybody can go to the library and access computer. And just, I don't know if Emma is still out there looking at Woodthorpe.
I am, yes. Yeah. I think
So
Woodthorpe School was just an officer decision based on our knowledge of the area. There was no other comments made.
But why did it go to the youth club rather than St. James, which is sort of halfway between the club, the youth school?
Sorry, when we looked at it, it was a bit of 6 and 2 3s, whether it was one or the other.
If you're saying, councillor, that it would be better to change it, we can, we can do that.
I mean, it's not my ward, but I do know it really well. I'm just thinking about people who can't walk very far. I think people assume that I keep being put in bays that are like a few yards up, and for me, it's like a marathon to go a few yards up. I can't be the only person in that position, and I think it's easy to forget. Lots of times in accessibility issues, people think, oh no, there's no problem here, and I get there and there is, because I'm living it, and I'm sure I'm not the only person living like this. So just to be a bit careful of those sorts of assumptions.
So committee is comfortable that we can review that when we forward the final report to council. Obviously, it's quite tight in terms of timescales, but we can quickly have a look at that tomorrow and see whether that suggestion would be more suitable.
Because there's quite a lot of people in that area, obviously quite condensed. Yeah.
Can I suggest as part of that looping in the ward councillors just to make sure that they've had sight of it. Councillor Coles?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, thank you for the report. And actually, I think it was, it felt hearteningly comprehensive, particularly in terms of the accessibility audit. That felt like a really important assessment of where all the polling stations were at. Certainly from a Westfield point of view, the proposals in terms of the tweaks to those boundaries look like they make an awful lot of sense. My only point was really just around any consultation in terms of any wider government shift on the moves on photo ID at polling stations, and either whether or not any consultation could factor in communication around that. I can't remember what it's called. The photo ID, the voter authority certificate, whatever it's called.
It's the voter ID,
But any consultation that we might do, either to encourage people, if they are voting in person, to encourage them to get that at the same point at which we're doing that, just to broaden out any wider consultation to just include that stuff. And that I guess there might be a wider
government consultation coming on that, because it was certainly a manifesto commitment to review it. And therefore, if we were doing that anyway, because there was a national consultation, whether or not that's an opportunity to kind of get people engaged in a wider conversation about polling stations and things. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have heard that the government is reviewing, and I think there are some documents are being added into the list of voter ID, and I can't remember off the top of my head what they are, but I know they're broadening. But yeah, absolutely. There's a whole kind of review underway of elections and how they work in electoral legislation. And I know our association, the AEA, has published a blueprint about how they see we should move forward with elections in the future. So absolutely take the point that whenever we do any kind of consultation, we will reinforce that message. I have to say, though, I think the voter ID did bed in very well at a polling station, so we didn't pick. So we have, well, we did do we had to keep the log, the survey for the parliamentary election of any issues, and it seems to have bedded in with the polling station staff, and they didn't flag any issues, any major issues with us. I appreciate that. That may not have been what members felt on the ground, but in terms of the formal report back, we didn't have any major issues.
I appreciate that. I think the issue is that it prevents people going to the polling station in the first place. And actually anything we can do to communicate with the public to encourage them to go to the polling station is a good thing.
Yes.
I think the problem with the requirement is you can't get one on the day. You have to get one 6 days before.
Yes.
And therefore, by the time you wake up to the fact that there's an election on and you want to go and vote, and you realise that in particular women, I mean, I've spoken to so many women who do not drive, who are not yet of retirement age, who then realise they don't have a form of ID just at the point of polling day. So anything we can do just to reinforce either registration for postal votes or to enable people to get that ID ahead of time would be great.
And the AA I know are pushing for some reform around emergency proxies and widening the remit of that. The uptake of voter authority certificates, which are the documents we can produce for anyone that hasn't got voter ID, incredibly low. So I think that message certainly needs to be pushed to get that message out. And
I mean, I don't want to get too off topic.
No.
With that. I mean, but obviously the people that don't tend to be the more disadvantaged groups. So that's the issue there. And I'm sure everybody that's knocked on doors on polling day will have come across numerous people that have said, I'm not going, I haven't got it. I mean, I met a little old lady that had been down to the polling station, turned away, and she'd gone back. She didn't have any ID, but she'd taken with her the photo, her wedding photo off the mantelpiece. That's the only sort of picture ID she could find in a house. So I think we do need to, I mean, it's a dreadful thing, but there we go. Anyway, Councillor Merritt, try not to.
Yes, I'd certainly echo your comment. I certainly had a couple of people when I was knocking up last time who were in exactly that situation. They didn't have the ID and weren't going as a consequence. And it does tend to be in the more disadvantaged areas, so it's discriminatory. Sorry, I wanted to come back to the issue of community governance review. I mean, it's obviously a significant thing to undertake, particularly if it's going to be a comprehensive job. I think it would be wrong for us to make a commitment at this point. I think what would be helpful is if we had a offline briefing note to just understand what's potentially involved, what the sort of order of costs, those types of things are. And that'll allow us to consult colleagues more widely in terms of what we do or don't do on that.
Yeah, I mean, would a report to this committee for the next meeting or something? Would that be a way of doing
absolutely,
it?
yes, I can produce that. Yeah, no problem at all.
So maybe something in the interim we can pass around groups, and then
Certainly, yes.
A report to this committee, and we can take a view perhaps on whether it's something we want to recommend. Rose?
Yeah, I mean, if we're agreeing the right final recommendations and we're publishing, etc., I think we can agree that there is an urgent need for a community governance review as a committee, and not commit us to any particular path, but request it comes back to the next meeting or the first available opportunity. I don't think anybody's disagreeing that there is obviously a need for CGR. It's just how we do it is the question.
Okay.
I did have the outstanding question around that one Acomb Street as well, Danesgate. I don't know if Emma's managed to caught it in my comments and slash the picture in the email. And if you've had a glance at it, Emma.
I did have a glance of it, and yeah, I can move that back. I can see your point about the front and the back of the houses, so I'm quite happy to change that.
Just my thought, whatever your professional opinion thinks is better, but it was in line with the other street moves where we've gone away from what they back onto and more who they front onto, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're happy to move on at that point, obviously we've got the additional recommendations around the CGR. And
Yes.
if we're happy then as a committee to follow the recommendations, I'm not seeing any dissent. So, okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Move on then to item 6, which is your open data. We're joined by Ian Cunningham, the Head of Business Intelligence.
Evening, Chair, Committee. So I think the point of tonight is that you want a bit of an update on open data. So I've put together a couple of slides. I won't spend hours going through them, but maybe I'll just do a few salient points out of them and then take some questions about open data. I'm sure there'll be all sorts really. So hopefully, I'm going to press some buttons here. I think this will work, Richard. Hey, there we are. Okay, so I feel like I've been around forever with open data, but we got some money around about 2015, 10 years ago, and it was given to us out of a number of government research bodies as the opportunity for the council to prove that it could publish data at scale. I mean, most authorities are custodians of all sorts of data and information, but struggle to get it out into the public domain. So the bodies that are there, Innovate UK, RC UK, kindly gave us some money to have a look into this. And it allowed us to build a platform. Yeah. No, I like looking backwards as well. People think it's a bit of a bonus if I disappear from the microphone. Okay, so it's allowed us to get a platform, and this platform is something called a CCAM platform. It's not very exciting, but it means it's almost like a data warehouse online that allows you to publish and see information. And then surrounding that, we have a front-end website. People can see it, York Open Data, and the two things interact together. Now, I've put some usage facts up there so people have a bit of an understanding about how many people are going to it and how often. But a lot of the data that's on there is dynamic. It allows people to connect to it. It allows you to use an application programming interface to draw data back out of it. It allows you to surface the data yourself onto other platforms. So it can be quite tricky to actually know how many people use it. Are you okay? Just manually move over. Thank you. Okay, so I've put some of the key reasons that we said we'd put the platform together. I mean, we've got things like the transparency code to meet. We would try and meet FOIs and get data out into the public domain before we're asked for it. We're also trying to do this at a relatively reasonable cost. Okay, we were very lucky to get hold of that funding in the first place, but we don't want to bring all that cost in terms of into the organisation. Everybody loves a diagram of IT schematics at an A&G committee, of course. I mean, it's everybody's favourite thing. But I just wanted to just put it there because what do we actually get for our money? We got the thing that's called a data collector there. We got a clever piece of kit that allows us to take the data out of all the warehouses and the systems internally and actually translate it, manipulate the information and then publish it outside of the organisation. And that little orange box is the bit that everybody struggles with, actually, of other local authorities. And while I thought I'd just show the bit on the right for everybody, is that there's lots of other places out there that do data. Census.gov.uk, statistics.gov, data.gov. And so actually what we've got is something called data harvesters that push that information out to all the platforms afterwards so that we don't have to do some manual time and effort to do it. Thanks, Richard. Okay, so one of the big questions I get asked is why do you put that? Which bits of data do you put out there? We have about 1,200 data sets on the platform at the moment, around about that level. And I've tried to put some of the reasons up there, but actually most of the time it's because somebody's asked. That might be one of our partners. It might be somebody who wants to do research in the city. It might be somebody who's come through for an FOI. It might be a resident wanting a specific piece of information. You might just want us to be able to do it slightly more transparently than we do at the moment. And the last one I think is really important, that it actually exists. Okay, so we get asked for the council to publish a lot of information that the council's not the owner of. So we try and publish everything under an open government licence, which means people can use the data, they can put it within reports, academic research, public documents. But we do have some data sets that we really struggle to do that with, especially things around ordnance survey or things that are owned by a third party. So I said there are around about 1,200 data sets. Since we launched, we've tried to put around about 100 data sets on a year. A lot of those data sets are key performance indicators, just cut in a slightly different way so people can get under the information. We've connected it into the corporate GIS system, so there's lots and lots of mapping layers that people might want to use afterwards. We've also met both the transparency code, the requirements on the authority, and then also transparency commitments that have been made by various administrations over the years. So I think we're in a reasonable place. We try and take down data when it's no longer applicable or no longer viewed. So I'll just keep going, Richard. Thank you. So I've talked about the little data controller that allows us to get data out into the public domain, but there are a few other ways as well. So we do some links straight into our internal systems. We do schedule some data that's going out, and we do have a number of partners in the city, Environment Agency, university, that have used it to publish their data on previously. And it's something that we tried to encourage a lot more in the early days of the open data platform. But I guess a lot of our partners think that the data has an intrinsic value to it. And we're not as keen, I think, as the local authority to publish this information or make it available. And that's something we might want to revisit again over the next couple of years. So the other bit is I get asked an awful lot about how often do you update the data? So I've said that some of this data is live and some of this comes through the data controller, but we do publish most of the data in line with our executive publishing or scrutiny publishing. So that's around about 700 data sets, which are updated on the same night across the board once a quarter. And I've tried, I think, our best in the authority to make this information published as frequently as I possibly can. Okay, there's all sorts of making sure that we understand what's in the information, that there's somebody that can comment on it if need be within the authority, especially that some of the data sets which are more sensitive. But in the main, we've tried to get out there as often as possible, and we've tried to keep it as accurate as possible. So there's a 5-star rating of data. We've looked for data sets which are both electronic, which are repeatable, which are machine readable. So we've tried to get into that space. We have got a number of data sets. I've mentioned a few of them before with things like ordnance survey, but I'm slightly nervous about putting them out in the public domain, mainly because we have all sorts of processes within the authority that allows us to check them. So good examples of that are things like traffic regulation orders, maybe some road condition information is another good example. Thanks, Richard. So one of the questions I think that has come up is has it got a good search engine, open data? I can't find what I'm looking for on it. And I think it's a fair comment back. I mean, it's not meant to be Google, okay? It's not meant to index every data set to the nth degree. So what we've tried to put on there is a front end that allows a search bar that's branded up the same as other City of York Council websites. We've tried to allow people to go through the data topics. And then we've also allowed people just to go straight into the searches for different types and different tags on the left. And I absolutely take on board some of the comments about, look, there's some data in there, can we get to it all the time? But without spending a lot of money on search engine optimization or on a front-end search into CCAN, our options can be a little bit limited. We have put some user guides on the previous page, and then I've just left a slide up here to allow people to see what happens once you go into the search. If we just click to the last one, and I said I wouldn't do too many slides, okay. I guess we've got some challenges in just maintaining what we have as an authority. So everything's about an improvement journey when we can. We know that data is probably a growth area and a growth industry of people wanting to have really good, robust evidence basis for making decisions. But maintaining all the underlying architecture that I've mentioned can be quite challenging. We've also got a number of partners, a number of research bodies, a number of third parties that would like to do lots of visuals and infographic type products with our data. And so we're trying to get it out there to that highest possible data standard, machine readable. And we've seen some good examples, bodies like Nesta, who've been building dashboards off the back of our information, I think is the council's information, I think it's a bit there. I've mentioned about getting back into the discussion with partners about surfacing some of the data. I mean, I've certainly seen it since the local plan decision has gone through, that lots of partners have wanted to get at that underlying information quite quickly and have offered to put information back from the university. So we'll look at that for the next couple of years probably. And then just keep on bearing in mind that I'm not sure it will always be agreed by all. I think we're in quite a good place with our open data platform in terms of the offer that we give back to the city. Most other authorities are using it just for the very basics of their transparency code. And they've launched a lot with fanfare and then struggled to maintain the amount of data sets they put in the public domain. And I mentioned about that little data controller because that's what really solved a part of our issue. So the other data sets that people might like to get to, there may be a higher cost in order to get behind those processes to make sure that we're even warehousing a lot of that data internally before putting it out external. So there are some technological challenges there. And then also just going back to what the open data platform's about, it's about providing that kind of 5-star data into the public domain that people are able to use. It's not trying to be an infographics platform. It's not trying to be a local information system. It is a place to go get hold of raw data and information. And so if we do decide as an authority or as a group that we want to go in a different direction, we need to probably relook at our specification of what it is rather than trying to twist what we've got at the moment. So hopefully that's a really quick run through. Please can. And we'll just take some questions if that's okay.
Okay. Are there any questions, issues you'd like to raise? Councillor Merritt and Councillor Rose.
Can I thank Ian for that presentation? I think might have been responsible for the request originally. Very much appreciated. Couple of questions. You said you had money to do this. I assume the original money's all gone. Is there any ongoing, or is there any ongoing funding or new funding that is available to help facilitate this, or are we just dependent on you and when you can find the time?
Probably the latter, sadly. So we were very lucky to get hold of breakthrough funding first time round. We've kept the costs very low, so less than 5 figures to run the platform a year for both ends of it, so maybe £5,000. We fund that up mainly because the authority receives some money under the transparency code in order to publish those data sets, and because it is a route to market for the transparency code, we've used that to keep the software running. I think we probably just got to keep on looking for opportunities within the research area and with our partners in order to expand the functionality or build new functionality. So costs are low, but no real development budget.
Okay. Is there a strategy behind this, an improved council strategy in terms of what we're trying to do in this area, what the vision is?
There was once upon a time,
right?
But I'm not sure it's something that we've updated for a while, and something yeah, we should probably have a think about. When we first put the bids together, the 2 or 3 that were successful, we had a strategy at that point to get us through the first 5-6 years, but since then it's been more of a continuation.
Perhaps we can look forward to that and seeing an updated strategy in due course when Ian's got time to look at it. Next question I had, do we do any customer surveys? Is there a facility within the platform for people to answer any questions on how they find the accessibility, usability of the data, things that they think are missing, general feedback in terms of the usefulness of the site.
Yes, there is something there that certainly could be improved upon. So I think we've got some embedded consultations within the site for people to give us feedback. There's connections into people to provide feedback electronically via email to us. That's mainly where, as an authority, we get the new requests from. And the other questions are, do you have this? And it's more us pointing out to where it already is within the site and the user guides for using it. We do get quite a few questions through there from developers. So people who are wanting to take the data into an application that they've built or a product that they've built and asking us for more advice than we're able to give them. Actually, we're able to help them partially along that journey, but we can't sort out the technological integrations they need for their products. Okay, so I think there's something there, but something that could be better.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Thanks. And yeah, appreciate the presentation, but also great job in general on the level of transparency and the maintaining of data, which is difficult. And I think we do a sterling job. I mean, I basically never ask questions about data of officers, and I've never needed to put in FOI or whatever because most of the data is just accessible on the web. I think I'll refer to page numbers because we've got the slides in the packs. But on page 82, you mentioned most people preview, and that's the reason we don't have massive numbers of downloads. Just to flag, I guess, there are lots of data sets that you can only download. The one that you provided as an example on page 91 was the ward profiles, which causes me minor grief on a regular basis. I'm at least 100 downloads of the total number of downloads just on ward profiles myself in the last year. So I've never reported that. I've never flagged that as a concern or an issue. But if there's anything we can do to fix the ones that aren't previewable, especially PDFs that you can usually open in the web, but for some reason we're forcibly downloading, that would be useful. On the same one, if you search for ward profiles, it comes up with 2013 first rather than 2025, and very rarely am I not looking for the most recent data on it. So a small SEO change in terms of if there's a way of if it brings up a data set first, if we can have the latest version of that data set on the search results, that's probably useful. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is my big question, and I won't get into the technical nit and grit of me being a bit of a data nerd, and whether it says FTP when it should say SFTP or whatever, but the question mark around data warehouse, is it actually a data warehouse or is it just a repository of files? And I mean that in a sense of, is there a way of making it more interrogatable? Would we be able to have a council website page that you can actually do some data interaction on rather than, with the right software, rather than having to download files or look at individual files? Most of the data sets are going to be per city or per ward per period of time. And so that kind of level of filtering is fairly straightforward in Tableau or Power BI or anything else, really. I've got a couple of other questions, but...
I guess it's a financial choice, isn't it, for your second part of your question? So on your first part, if I just take the question about PDFs and CCAN, I mean, it just doesn't allow you to preview PDFs within it. It's the data warehouse that it is rather than a repository of files, because inside of it, in effect, it's just full of database tables which store information. And the PDF is just sitting within there, which is why you can't preview it. I'll absolutely take away the comment about the ordering. I mean, some of that is just to do with CCAN's default settings that we struggle to manipulate, which is probably to do with the date it was uploaded to the site. And we have gone through a number of the data sets and we have to reorganise them as best as we possibly can. You can imagine with ward profiles with 21 wards, sometimes 22, maybe even more after the earlier conversation, and 4 or 5 updates a year, there's a lot of data that's moving around. And one of the reasons we put the ward profiles together is because that is 200 data sets, 300, 400 data sets in its own right, all connected together about the wards, and we were trying to save people some time. The other question about whether or not we could do something with kind of a Tableau or Power BI front end, absolutely. I mean, we could connect it up to the open data platform now, but there are costs involved in that to an authority to do. And I think I gave an example before about when I said local information system. I mean, that's something that some authorities have gone down the route of having a front end which allows a little bit more interrogation along the way. They are quite costly to do from my experience previously, and while there's sometimes a limited cost on the software, a bit like the question on polling districts earlier, there's cost on people setting up those kind of processes behind the scenes. But it's something I think we've been thinking about as an authority. The need isn't always just external, so maybe that's something we can maybe revisit at a later time. But I have seen some authorities do it quite well.
I think it's good, I guess good to bear that in mind, and noting what I didn't bring up on the action plan. But the action plan for this item says to see if the data published could be consolidated to enable a more user-friendly system. And I think the user-friendly system would be Power BI or something where you just point and click and it gives you data rather than trying to navigate your way through 1,200 data sets. But I think that's really it's good to be aware of the art of the possible. And I think for me it probably is upfront more the cost of licensing, because having infinite potentially infinite users accessing something is a funny way that Microsoft and other people do it, and setting up one data set on a website somewhere isn't necessarily too painful as a trial. But if we wanted to do it for all 1,200, it would be a nightmare. My last question was, you mentioned about 10 externals plugging into the data sets on page 86. I was wondering if you give a flavour of the types of connections, not who's requesting at data.gov.uk, etc., but what sorts of data are we integrating usually from our side?
Is the question, is it the people who are from outside who are providing data onto the platform?
The integrated
or is it more
data.
the developers who are then taking that data and then using it for other applications?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the context, it's making 10 data sources available for external, I guess, API link probably.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of, maybe get the question on here, sorry, but the majority of the data sets that are already available to connect into. So we see that when we normally get contacted if we have an internal problem, so maybe say our corporate GIS is having a few challenges that affects the external world, we'll be contacted by external bodies that are automatically connecting into that data. So we know, for example, at the University of the Stockholm Institute down there, they have a web platform that draws off all sorts of our GIS data sets to it. And when that goes down, it doesn't work any longer for them. So we can see a bit of that. We've also had a number of app developers who've wanted to offer things like tourism or shop vacancy or movement information that will pick up some of the data sets there. But because we're giving those out for free and we find it very difficult to track when the calls are made into CCAN, it can be really difficult to see who's actually using it. There's a bit of it, build it and they will come kind of set up rather than tracking it. Okay.
Okay, Councillor Coles.
Thank you. I feel like this is like data nerd corner over here, but sorry, as you know, I'm a big fan of the data platform, particularly the ward profiles, which are great. But I have I think I probably have a more fundamental point, possibly of disagreement, really. So I'm kind of interested in what we do versus what other local authorities do. And I'm slightly concerned about us maybe misrepresenting the value that this data has. And I absolutely don't have an issue with us using that to support the building of good public services and supporting the work that the council does to serve the public. But do we know who is accessing our data and what they are using it for? Because if they're using it for the good of the public, then that is obviously a really good thing. And if they're using it to improve public services, that's a really useful thing. But if they're not, and they're just taking our data to do something else with, then I have a bit of a problem with that. And I think that we should probably be more discerning in terms of how we protect the public's data in terms of our city and our information about our our citizens. And I know that some of this stuff is just open data, but I suppose that we put it out there and then people are taking it and we don't actually have any assurance that they're doing good things with it. So just any assurance you can give me that it's not being used for nefarious purposes would be great.
Interesting question. I'm not sure I can give you those assurances that people wouldn't be using it for reasons that are outside our control. I guess that's the whole point of the open government licence, which is that you're giving people the opportunity to use it how they see fit, and it's not something that's controlled by us. I think it is a challenge to us, but even it's the same challenge that we'd have if our statutory data that we're putting out that then gets published by a DFE or a DHSC, people can use that for slightly nefarious purposes back against us. The same for if we're putting information out for the transparency code that we have to use, or we're putting data in public reports. It doesn't always mean it's used to the advantage within the council. I haven't seen anybody use it against us over the years. I've seen people use it for a different viewpoint that's maybe going through as a policy at the time or has been collectively agreed by all, and people have used it to argue a different angle. I've not seen anybody try to resell it or to try and make commercial profit on something that we wouldn't support afterwards. Okay, I've seen the odd business try and start up off it that isn't really a business model, so hasn't got going. But I haven't seen it against the against residents or back against city council for a nefarious reason. It's just a balance, isn't it? You can't have openness and control it as well at the same time. So there's a bit of an either or here. Okay.
Councillor Merritt?
Yes, I think that comes back to debates like over the internet, and Bernard Manners-Lee hoped that by making everything public, it actually avoided, in effect, some of the more negative uses and private uses and abuse of data. But I think the other question for me has always been about the accessibility. And from my own attempts to use the platform, some of it's very good, particularly the ward profile stuff, but some of it's actually pretty much inaccessible and unusable unless you have a lot of IT expertise. So that's something, along with some of these other questions, that I think a strategy ought to be looking at. Clearly, if it is a substantial investment, then it's going to have to take its chance against other priorities. But getting a sense of what other, it's 10 years since you started. Where are some of the best practice authorities on these types of issues? Actually having some sense of that, I think, would be quite useful. The other issue, I mean, you talked about the GIS systems. The council's been developing its GIS systems, particularly in terms of place issues. But so are, I sit on the Yorkshire Water Customer Forum. They have been developing their GIS systems in terms of all the information about their sewer discharges, lots of other bits and pieces of information. The Environment Agency has its separate GIS-based systems. There are probably an increasing number of public authorities using GIS systems. Are there any discussions going on about interfacing those different platforms and in effect coming up eventually with something that is much more comprehensive, readily usable by the public, that pulls all this information together?
Another easy question. Okay, so you're absolutely right that some of the partners in the city or the wider region have got an awful lot of asset data, and it's put out slightly patchily. But what does exist in the background is something called the National Underground Asset Register. And that is a non-public facing site, but it is for agencies such as the council, such as Yorkshire Water, such as Environment Agency, to go place all of their asset data upon it. Because going back to the previous comments about nefarious usage, if you put where the gas mains are, and then secondly, about the commercial value, actually, of some of that information that might then get resold back into either the street works arena or to private developers of various things. So we've got that this thing's been set up at a national level. It's on a bit of a journey, I think, would be the polite way of saying how far they're getting through it. But as an authority, because as you're right, Councillor Merritt, we have been improving all of our asset bases over the last umpteen years. I think we interface through the same technology, maybe 100 different GIS data sets straight through to that National Underground Asset Register. So you'll have people here in this authority, such as flood managers, depot managers, operational services, highways engineers that can go to that platform and see those other data sets there. And because we've spent some money as an authority improving drainage, highways-based systems last couple of years, I think we've been able to do more than most local authorities to put information there. So your point at the start about where are other local authorities, I think there's absolutely a conversational bit of thinking that needs to be had about that kind of local information platform piece that you and Councillor Rose were describing, which is a little bit more about playing with the data and being able to see it and get underneath it. But in terms of our asset information, because we've brought everything together in single systems and passed them on, I think we're in a pretty fantastic place compared to other authorities there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go to Councillor Fisher, and then if we could wrap up.
Thank you. I think quite a lot of what I was going to say was actually covered by that last point. I take your point about people using it against us, but the key point about it, I don't think I've ever found any information on there that's specific to any individual. I mean, you think about it, we publish an electoral register, which of course has names and addresses on it, you know, which people can get hold of and use for direct marketing purposes. That's more of a concern to me, because I want to make sure, if possible, my name is not on the publicly available register. But if it contained that, I'd be more concerned about, you know, abuse of it by third parties. I don't think we can stop people using the information that's there. I think it's there, it's out there, it's very useful. I use the walk profile a lot, but also I think it's useful for internal use for people who want to find information for dealing with things like FOIs, which we get a fair number of. It's critical that database is there and available for people to use.
Okay, thank you. If we could wrap up there, I think we're looking in due course for I guess an update and perhaps a look at the strategy could come back in as and when.
Whatever it wants. Yeah, I think it is. I think the comment about we've had it for going for 10 years and something to look at. Absolutely, I think it is something we need to revisit. It's just going back to the comment about the funding and the setup of it. It's something that we're lucky to get out there, and we've maintained as an authority. Sometimes that kind of step to the next level can be quite challenging. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. If we can move on then to item 7, which is Monitor 3, and I'll hand over to Debbie Mitchell, who's our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. So this report outlines the Q3 update on the key corporate risks. It's a bit of a light touch review, as you know. Helen, that used to do this, has left us. I have made some further arrangements for some more support, so the next one will be better. But this is just a bit of an interim review for Q3. So the main changes to the key corporate risks are outlined in paragraphs 15 to 21. The majority of them really are actions updated. So we've approved the financial strategy at full council last month, things like that. We've kind of moved on a year. I think the main change has been KCR2, which we've restored now as a governance risk. I think previously it was more of an information governance risk. So we've broadened the actions and the implications to be more governance generally, rather than just information governance. In effective and strong partnerships, again, we've updated the implications and the wording of some of the controls, and we've added in a new control around a joint project that's looking at the development of the new neighbourhood team model. Again, with KCR 7, the capital programme, we've updated the actions to reflect we've moved on a financial year, but we've also added a new action about reviewing the governance of major capital projects, which is something that we need to do. KCR 8, obviously the local plan has now been approved, so we've updated for that, and there's a consideration at some point, I guess, not at this review, but a future review about whether it still remains a key corporate risk. That's something we'll probably come back to at a future meeting. And then the other ones have just been we've reviewed and actions and revised some of the dates. So there's nothing particularly outstanding or unusual to refer to. The other issue is that I think agreed at the last meeting where we talked about risk, that we will go back around the circle of reviewing a key corporate risk for each meeting. So for this one, we've done key corporate risk 1, which is the financial pressures. We've just done a bit more of a detailed summary so that you know a bit more of the information, and we'll work through it each meeting, as well as the usual review. We'll also bring an in-depth review. So it's me this time, it'll be Bryn next time. We'll go through in order, but it'll get more interesting as we go on, because you'll see other faces, because we'll bring other risk owners in. It won't just be me and Bryn going through it. There'll be the relevant risk owner should come along and just again give you a bit more detail and opportunity to find out a bit more. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any issues, questions? Councillor Merritt?
No, I thought it was a very helpful report, particularly the detailed one on the financial risk. We've got a dozen of these, haven't we? So if we just do one a meeting, that's 2.5 years.
Yeah, it takes us a while to get through them, definitely.
Yeah. Should we be perhaps trying to go round a bit faster than that?
We can try. I think the idea was that you wanted a bit of an in-depth
Yeah.
review of each key corporate risk, and I think it was maybe felt when we did it last time that more than one was kind of a bit too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can play it by ear and see. Some I guess will be more straightforward than others, to be fair, and some you might want to spend a bit more time on than others. So we can have a look at the timetable and see if we can consolidate it.
Perhaps some of the simpler ones we could pair up so that the cycle's a bit shorter. The local plan obviously is adopted, so the big corporate risk of it not being adopted is clearly gone. That said, what is the local plan trying to deliver for the city is absolutely still a key issue for us, and therefore the actual, in effect, delivery of the local plan, I'm not sure whether it qualifies as a corporate risk, but would still be a key issue for the council to monitor. So perhaps in terms of the one that you bring to the next meeting, perhaps that one should be one that's particularly looked at.
Yeah, I'll take that away. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Just one observation about key corporate risk, 9 communities. I'm still getting far too many complaints from parish councillors and parish clerks about the failure to comply with the parish charter. So too many times we've had decisions that have been made by City of York without the consultation of the local parish when they should have been consulted. That is something I really think we need to take back and try to get it established throughout the whole workforce that where parishes exist, they should be consulted on matters that concern them. I mean, we get planning consultation, obviously, and things like that, but there are so many other areas where small decisions have been made which affect the parish, which the parish council was totally unaware of until it had been done. So there is a parish charter. Please, can we stick by it?
Curiously, Chair, that obviously loops back to the conversation you were having earlier about the governance review. And if you end up doing a governance review, then everybody needs to have that in mind anyway. So that's certainly something we can look to pick up. I wonder, Chair, if it would be helpful if we perhaps look to find a date and organise a briefing for members, and we'll take you through some of the detail, so we can perhaps cover more ground.
Yep, sounds good. Councillor Coles.
Just a question about how these risks interact with each other. So Councillor Fisher's point about the parishes is absolutely well founded around parish consultation, but presumably one of the reasons for you know, that not happening in the way that you might want it is to do with financial pressures on council officers, and so corners get cut and democracy kind of suffers as a result. So it's not that there's an intention in doing that in that way, but I'm just interested in how, you know, some of those pressures all impact, for example, on financial pressures, or financial pressure impacts on all of them to a certain degree, and it's just whether or not there's a way of briefing us in a way that enables us to better understand this. I mean, I know they're scored and they're scaled, but actually, you know, some of these are only one number apart in terms of their score, but actually that financial one just feels like it probably is a driver of a lot of the other risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, we can have a look at a way we can brief you. The layout's not great of how we set some of this out as well. So we can have a look. We'll have a look at whether what we can make the connections a bit clearer. So you're right. I mean, the financial risks underlie everything really. And then again, if you get something wrong in the governance, you're adding to your financial risk. You're risking something in your community. So it is more of a kind of a web rather than a list. So we'll have a look at how we could achieve that.
Councillor Burton.
Just something that hit me, which is very obvious. I mean, obviously things that like the Ukraine situation and COVID, some of those no one expected an invasion of the Ukraine, really. Well, some people did, some people didn't, but that had an awful impact on lots of different things. I mean, how can you take that into consideration completely without, you know?
Yeah, it is hugely challenging, obviously, and even if we'd known that Ukraine was going to be invaded, I'm not sure we would have fully understood the impact of that on the rest of the world. So yeah, we do have key corporate risk 12 around major incidents, which attempts to look at how we deal with, you know, a terrorist attack or a pandemic, and so the controls and the mitigation is around our emergency planning and our business continuity plans, which wouldn't obviously be as specific as what would you do if Russia invaded Ukraine, but try and set out what, you know, how some of that would work. So there is for that kind of thing. So KCR 12 major incidents, there's a whole range of things that sit below it from an officer perspective. There's a local resilience forum working with police, other councils, lots of other partners. And so there is a lot more beneath this. So again, you know, if we were looking at KCR 12 today, we would be telling you about all those kind of different details and other arrangements that are in place that, even though they can't predict the exact risk, we will have done work to try and, you know, mitigate a major event such as that happening and how it might impact on our food resource and all those kind of things. But that would probably be something more regional rather than just specific to the council. We'd be working with our regional partners.
Yes. I know that there have been some mock-ups, haven't there, of incidents and things about the number 12, but I was just thinking about you know, you can't mitigate for everything. That's the reality of it.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, back all the points that are made, I think, and I think it's an interesting one around the point scoring. This is the traditional way of doing risk management, where you score on impact and probability, but actually it's less the risk of finance impacting the others. It's more that the mitigation of the finance risk is by intentionally negatively impacting all the others, if you like. So I don't know how we would portray that, but I think that's a good one. But just to say, I guess number one, I think the report is very clear. I think you're doing yourself a disservice on saying it's not as good as usual. It tells everything we need to know, and the detailed report is really useful. So yeah, looking forward to seeing the others as they come through as well. And then just the summary on page 131 shows how much better it's looking now than it was. You know, basically every single risk down. I think all but one was above 20 previously, and most are below. I haven't got it in front of me, but yeah, massive congrats to everyone who has been reducing the budget year on year whilst also reducing the risk, which is an extremely hard thing to do. So just want to call out that success, really.
Councillor Fisher.
Take up Councillor Burton's point. There are some things we can't foresee. Actually, I think this key corporate risk perhaps should also have another couple of words added to it, which is failure to foresee and respond appropriately. Because, you know, if you look at this city and you compare it with Magdeburg and other areas which have had hostile vehicle attacks recently, we have at least protected the core centre with, you know, a system that will protect against the worst possibilities of that. Other cities haven't done that and they're at risk. But yeah, I think it's partly not just responding to things, it's looking for where the threats are. You know, obviously flooding is a major threat. We know about that, we deal with it. But it's just trying to foresee what could go wrong. Could there be a drone attack? Have we got any system to prevent us against some malevolent person flying a drone into the city centre, you know, with releasing some toxic substance? I don't know how we deal with it, but we have to sort of try and foresee what the threats are, because unfortunately, like it or not, there are people out there who want to cause trouble. And it's trying to foresee how we can forestall that before it happens. Obviously, security services are there to do a lot of that work, but as long as we liaise with them, they will presumably keep us briefed.
It was in fact the hostile vehicle mitigation that made me think of this thing about what the implications of such things were, because I think the rising cost of raw materials rose so much from the initial quote, which if they'd been bought at that point would have cost half the price that they did eventually cost to the city. So, I mean, but who could have foreseen that? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, can't see any further comments at that point. So if we're happy to move on. So we're desperate for a quick break. Yes. Okay, we'll take 5 minutes and back at 7:05. Okay, welcome back, everybody. If I can move on then to item 8, which is the auditor's annual report and fee variance letter, and we're joined by Mark Outside, who's the director of Forvis Mazes, and Debbie, I think, is also presenting. So,
thank you, Chair. This is our auditor's annual report, which provides a summary of the audit work completed for the financial year 23-24, and it also includes our value for money commentary. I'll take the report as read and focus on the key messages for you this evening. Section 1 of the report highlights that we issued an unqualified audit opinion on your financial statements before the February backstop date. We've also not highlighted any significant weaknesses in the council's value for money arrangements, and we did not report any issues regarding our wider responsibilities. As previously reported, we've been unable to issue our auditor's certificate because we're still awaiting guidance from the National Audit Office on if yolks are sampled component for the WGA. Sections 2, 4, 6 and the appendices repeat the messages from our audit completion report, which we presented in January of this year. And section 3 includes our commentary on your VFM arrangements. Consistent with the prior year, we have not highlighted any significant weaknesses in those arrangements. However, we have highlighted 2 other recommendations on page 13 of our report. These concern the identification and scrutiny of saving plans within the medium-term financial plan. That's in the context of the £22 million gap that was reported as at the time of writing this report, and arrangements to ensure the council's minimum revenue provision is sufficiently prudent. Again, that was a follow-up from the previous year's other recommendation. Page 24 outlines our audit fees. In addition to our report, we've also issued the fees letter confirming our intention to charge additional fees for additional work related to the revised ISA 315, which the PSAA had not included in their scale fee. This is for additional work in regard to enhanced risk assessment of the council's IT environment and any potential impact it could have on our audit procedures. We also place greater emphasis on inherent risk factors, particularly those related to management bias and fraud. And in addition, we plan to charge additional fee for additional work completed concerning our broader reporting responsibilities. So that concludes our report. Happy to take any questions.
thank you. And are there any questions? Councillor Merritt.
Could I ask about your comments on the MRP? And obviously we are a little bit out of line with other local authorities, but out of line in a good way or out of line in a bad way? What's the actual rationale?
It depends which way you look at it. So I would say that York's probably paying less in terms of the overall proportion of MRP compared to other councils. So it has come up as an outlier on our data set. But at the same time, that's not to say that it's not sufficiently prudent for York City Council. That's where you would get the assurance from Debbie in her Treasury Management reporting.
Yeah, just to be, sorry if I might just come in on that. Obviously, it's my statutory responsibility to ensure that the MRP is prudent. So that's we have a slight disagreement between ourselves and the auditors over what we think is prudent, but ultimately it's my judgment to determine whether it's prudent. It's my professional responsibility to determine what's a prudent provision. And Matt's quite right to point out where, in their data set, we are lower than average, but your MRP is based on a whole range of circumstances, your local circumstances, and a whole range of factors. So I think we agree that it's not something that can be easily compared in a sort of league table format, because there are a lot of factors that determine whether your MRP provision is prudent.
Okay, Councillor Coles.
Thanks. Just a question about your fees. So on page 168 of the report, the fees are just under £300,000. I just wondered how many staff hours that was and what the management charge for that was.
In terms of how many audit hours,
Yeah.
I don't have that information available this moment, but I could bring that to you if you wanted it.
I just think it's quite an important.
But the PSEA set the fee. It's not our fee to set as well. So we kind of contractually talk about the fee setting, but I can certainly tell you how many hours.
I assume the fee is set around a piece of work and how much work is involved in delivering something.
The PSEA set the fee, and the outputs of this report confirm what we've delivered. So we've issued our opinion on the financial statements. We've considered our wider reporting responsibilities. We've discharged our duties in regard to value for money.
No, I appreciate what you've done for the money. I'm just, have we paid £299,000?
To
Yeah.
the PSEA, yes.
Right. That's my question, is about that.
Okay.
And understanding what sits behind that and what we got for that money. Other than some financial assurance, which I appreciate that we got for that.
Perhaps if that could be circulated, just to, I guess, give the committee a bit of an idea of, say, I mean, I appreciate fees are going up to try and stop the problems we were having before with, you know, recruitment of auditors and all those sorts of issues, but it would be useful perhaps to contextualise the numbers, because obviously a doubling of the fees is probably something that
As well, yeah, but also remembering that the fees have gone down and our workload's gone up.
Yeah, so
It's
in terms of contextualising, because you know, you look at the numbers and you go, crikey, they've doubled. It'd be useful just to get an idea of why that is, rather than just we pay twice as much.
Yep. In our next progress report, we'll include something around rebuilding assurance. So the talk about setting up the local audit office, so that there'll be a much more centralised approach in terms of regulation, in terms of contract, awarding the contract, in terms of client management and things like that. At the moment, you've got the FRC, you've got the National Audit Office, you've got SIPFA, you've got all of these system leaders, and what they're doing is moving towards a single point of contact for that. And part of that is reflected in the rebuilding assurance and the increase in fees. And I think probably when the Audit Commissioner around, this is a similar sort of level of fees as were paid back then.
I think we can probably include some sort of briefing, couldn't we, around just the background to the PSAA and how we contract for our external audit, and also just a reminder of the Redmond review and the impact of the local audit market, which highlighted really that there were some key challenges for audit firms and for local audit, really. So we could pull all that into part of the update, man.
You remind me to do that.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful. I think the work done by Forvis Mazars and Variance, when we get to them later, is part of the incredible work the council's done in being the most value for money council in the UK, surviving extremely well financially on the lease that we receive from the government, #1 in the country for lease. And as we've just been talking about the risk management, all the risks across the corporation coming down is a huge success story, and a small amount of money in some of these areas can go a long way in terms of bringing down other values. So there's a lot of positives there. The flip side of that is, you know, finances have doubled effectively on here, and the trajectory is more of the concern. Is it going down next year or doubling again, or how does that look? And I know that when we were looking at partners, there was no question for us who it was going to be, because the work quality was really high, but also because the market's relatively thin. And as governor on the York and Scarborough Hospital, when that came through, when we were looking at that work and in public session, we effectively said that Forvis Mazars to us was almost a monopoly in the market because of the number of qualified, good, capable alternatives. And the risk with that is you can kind of charge whatever you like, and we have to deal with it. So I think it'd be good to just have a bit more of a detail around how we can have assurance that the value is right, even though I think we all know that the value is really good for what we get out of it and for the assurance we get as a council.
I think, yeah, it's a really strange situation. It's the PSEA that sets the fees for councils, whereas you mentioned York hospitals. That is our fee, and that we would contract that with you as a trust.
Okay, Councillor Merritt.
Yes, just in terms of the major increase, how much is that a change in the rate, and how much is it a change in the scope of what you're actually doing?
There's no change in the scope of the work.
Right. So it is basically just a massive rate rate increase by the PSA. Yeah.
Yes, the PSA.
Okay.
Okay.
What about the additional commissions? There's obviously the basic, and then there's all the extra items. Is that discretionary, or is that again a PSA set?
Anything we ask for in addition will be based on additional work that we've had to complete in that particular year.
Right.
That would go to the PSA and they would moderate that. And then they would put that into the fees for the next year if they recognise it as a recurring cost. If it was a one-off cost, no, they would not.
Right. Okay.
But
Thank you.
all of that gets moderated.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on then to item 9, which is the internal audit work programme. I think we've been joined by Conor Monroe and Max Thomas from Veritel. Thank you. Yeah, if you'd like to give us a brief summary of.
Yeah, certainly can, Chair. So this is our internal audit work programme for 2025-26. It represents the combination of consultation that's taken place over the last 2 months. The committee might recall that in January we presented to yourself the consultation report, which is a precursor report to this, and sought your views on potential areas of internal audit priority. Since then, we have been to directorate management teams, spoken to statutory officers, we've spoken to other officers across the council, we've been to the Leading Together Forum, and we've obviously looked at sources of intelligence that we have internally and across our client base to come up with a programme of work for the council for 25-26, based on our contracted days, 1,023 days. And in Annex A to the report, is really the major one, and that is essentially our indicative work programme as of today. I think the report talks about in some length about the reason for having the programme, which is ultimately to give our opinion on the strength of the council's risk management, governance and control arrangements, and it's the body of that work taken together which allows us to give that opinion. So the rest of the report I will sort of take as read, but I'm happy to take the committee's sort of comments or questions or views on the report as presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions, Councillor Merritt?
Yeah, no, thank you for the report, and obviously it's quite a large programme of work for the year. And I welcome that there's still a little bit of flexibility at the edges. I just wanted to test on the project management capital programme side of the council. We've obviously got a number of major projects where the costs have significantly escalated, and I was wondering what work is going to be done looking at that in terms of, you know, how much that's simply externalities that we really do not have control, and how much that's a reflection of perhaps not having the best project management arrangements and planning in hand.
Absolutely, yeah. So it will be covered effectively twice in the programme the coming year. So we've got an audit of major projects, so specifically looking at the council's large projects as it defines them. So its capital projects, but also the gateway review process as well, which those projects need to go through to assess their fitness to move into later stages and into delivery. So we'll have 2 bits of coverage there. We also have ongoing piece of work, contract management, but relating to major projects as well. So specifically focusing on how the contracts are managed rather than the projects. So this work is then meant to complement that, to give us a fuller picture of how circumstances might have arisen in relation to the major projects.
And just to add, the scope of the individual audits will obviously be informed by some of the issues that are current. So if there is a major overspend on a project, that's more likely to be one that will.
Yeah. Okay. Could I ask a separate question? I welcome that the data is in the list as well. I know from asking questions at scrutiny committees, when we see the performance reports, there's certain areas of the council where data is well behind. It's difficult, despite repeated requests, to get the up-to-date information, and there are clearly problems in those areas. So I assume, again, is your data work going to be looking at the production of the performance indicators and where there are problems and what needs to be done to sort the problems that there clearly are?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think there's probably 2 points there, because one's about data availability and the other one is data quality. We do have an audit of data quality in the programme, so that would more likely than not take a sample of indicators that are existence across the council, work them back and try and reperform them to make sure that they are actually accurate. But more so than that, what are the assumptions and what are the various calculations that go in, and how reasonable are they to give a true picture of events? What we're also doing though is across the piece. So while this might be data quality in name only, I guess the other audits will be looking at data quality principally because we need that in order to be able to sort of deliver the work that we do. So we'll be looking to report thematically to this committee in future as well. So we'll have, once we raise findings in reports, we'll be able to, in totality, effectively jot up the number of times where we've encountered data availability, data quality issues, and then give you a sense for how, potentially how widespread that is or how significant it is in the context of other issues as well. So I would just reassure you that yes, there is an audit in the way and in the works for that, but actually it's a consideration that we give across the work that we do. And will that review look at the production of data and performance indicators strategically, in the sense of, the big questions, are we actually are we getting the right data to inform the council's policies and developments in those policies, and that they are actually working effectively? Yeah, I mean, there's a separate audit actually in the current years, but it will effectively continue on into this year, which is around the performance management framework. So that'll be looking at the golden thread between those strategic objectives all the way down to the KPIs that are I guess, measured. So that will be looking at that more whole scale, as it's how it fits together rather than specific data quality concerns. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the report and thanks for the huge slate of work that you do each year. And I guess the opposite question that we had last time around in terms of size of scope going up or cost benefit, the scope keeps increasing and the cost doesn't go up quite so much. But there's an element of concern, I guess isn't the right word, but assurance that we need that we're not overstretching you guys, and also that we're not overstretching the cost of it. And I'd obviously have to look towards Debbie and the wider team for confidence that each individual piece of work has an ROI attached to it. But if we're putting in a few thousand to make a huge amount back, then I'll always welcome it. The hard bit with that full slate of next year is really knowing if there's anything that can be cut out of it and what the risk is. So at the top end of things, audit of our savings delivery and how much we're trying to save versus how much we actually save year on year. We always have some buckets we don't actually hit anywhere near what our target savings are, and some that we manage to save more than. But anything that we can squeeze out of that, we could be saving millions potentially if we find things that we hadn't spotted previously. Section 106 agreement contributions, use of fleet vehicles. I mean, they're all areas where you could find a huge chunk of change in there. And then the flip side, things like malware protection might be something that we've already got locked, and there might be nothing to squeeze out of it. Or data quality is just a big barrel of mess that how far do you go with that? Home to school transport, we already know the challenges in those spaces. So I don't really have any comment around suggesting we cut anything out of there, but it just feels like the list is more than we could achieve within the time frame that we've got. It'd be good to get some thoughts around that.
Yeah, okay. The list is long, but that's because we over prioritize the work. So we don't realistically expect to deliver everything, but we have a over programmed list because that's the way we can deliver the work most efficiently. So we're always prioritizing, trying to pick out the audits which are most closely aligned to the council's priorities and risks. But inevitably, by the end of the year, we won't manage to deliver everything on that list.
If it helps to give some insight to that, it's between 10 to 20% over programmed in terms of sort of the day's commitment. So, you know, we can potentially drop some audits in that order. So if you look at that list, to shrink it by, you know, 10 to 20% is likely what the delivery output will look like. Clearly not in the list of audits, because in between now and then that might well change in terms of what comes in and what drops out. But you'd like to think it bears some quite close resemblance to that at the end of the year. But in terms of the number of items, yeah, it would be fewer. It just allows us to have those conversations about, okay, we can't do this, but we already identified this. Is it still a priority? Yes or no? And we can be more fleet of foot when those sort of discussions come about.
Presumably vice versa as well. If you start to pre-scope and realise there's not actually really much merit in going ahead with that.
Yeah,
I just kind of spelling out the broader things. For those of us who are chronically online and communicating with residents every 5 seconds across social media, the last month and a half they've started harping on about consultant costs, etc. And it's that kind of space where that's what the public often sees as the waste in the council. Now, as I say, I think actually most of the time that's where the waste is rooted out and addressed is through spotting where actually we should be doing something we're not quite doing right, and the value's there. But it's good to make sure that we've got that assurance that we are prioritising appropriately and only spending what we need to spend.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Can't see any further questions, so thank you for your time this evening. We'll move on then to item 10, which is the counter fraud plan, and I think we're keeping Max and gaining Jonathan, who's the Assistant Director for Corporate Fraud.
So this is the counter fraud plan, and it sets out our priorities for counter fraud work in the next financial year. The priorities are set by considering development against counter fraud national strategy through an update of our fraud risk assessment, and which is included in Appendix A of this report, and by reviewing the council's counter fraud policy framework. So there's a development plan in Appendix B, which talks about these priorities, but I'll just pick out just 3 quick ones. We want to update the council's whistleblowing policy, improve training, and continue to promote the policy. We've been developing a new approach around compliance for council tax and single person discounts. And this is where we're trying to give people a nudge to say, you know, your claim might be incorrect. Do you have something to tell the council? If the pilot is successful, then we'll seek to make it part of business as usual. And finally, we've identified a new economic crime and corporate transparency bill, which comes into force in September. So there may be some effect on the council due to this legislation. Also, the new Procurement Act is coming out, so we want to update our training to staff about procurement fraud. So I'm happy to take any questions about any of that.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, we've just got 3 questions. The first one's page 210. It talks about how it has a strong anti-fraud policy from us reviewed annually. I was just wondering if you could spell out in more detail what that annual review looks like. You know, who performs what parts of it. If that's all right.
So this is the fraud policy review?
For the anti-fraud policy framework review, if that makes sense.
So we look at the whistleblowing policy, we look at our counter fraud policy, and we just make sure that they're in step with current legislation, current best practice. For example, there's been some slight changes to whistleblowing that have occurred this year in the news. We'll want to update the policy to reflect those changes. And if we feel the policies are in line with best practice, then we'll say, well, we're good.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, the policy is generally quite mature. They don't need a lot of change, but so changes that we do bring or recommend changing, they tend to be fairly minor changes. It's still useful to do that annual review.
Yeah, I guess where my head's at is it just an internal team looking at whether any legislative changes are taking place, or when we talk about, for example, comparisons against best practice, do we have feeding into that the people who have been part of, you know, if anybody has been whistleblowing, I know you can't identify people, etc. necessarily, but how much do we have external input, and also how much do we compare ourselves to other best practice experts externally?
It is an internal process, but we are very active in the counter fraud community, and we talk to lots of councils about their policies and practices. So I think that we tend to have our finger on the pulse.
The other two are more specific areas. The first is page 224 talks about the measures in place to control the issue of blue badges to ensure that only eligible applicants receive blue badges. And I guess there's no concern, it's very low priority, it's very low gains that we get out of it, which matches, I think, what we all know to be true of blue badge in the city. But in terms of the controlling the issue of the issuing of blue badges and eligibility of criteria, etc., I guess the counter fraud aspect is part of what are those criteria? Are we giving them to too many or too few? How much of that is set nationally? How much of that is local? To what extent is the fraud related to the levels we set them at? Because I think there are a lot of people in the city who don't receive one, who at the very least think they should, or I would argue probably should, who would, you know, be able to try and you know, find evidence to back that claim that they're not putting forward, and we know that it's not fraudulent, but also if they're not receiving something they should receive, how do they get the balance right? How do we get the balance right on that?
Councils set their own eligibility measures for giving out blue badges to people. I have to say that the fraud we see in the city is not by people who are falsely applying for badges. It's more about misuse, and it's often misuse by people who are not even the badge holder in the first place. So we don't have a lot of issues with the work that York does in providing the badges.
Thanks. I guess it's a broader issue for us to take away, that there is never an issue in that space, and yet we routinely have those challenging conversations with residents and on both sides of the fence, people who think that there are issues in that space when they're not, and also people who aren't receiving ones that probably should, while we have no fraud to worry about as well. So particularly when we're looking at some of the bollard stuff we're talking about earlier, I think it's worth bearing that in mind. The final one's, I guess, kind of a very specific pointed thing, which is page 210 says in 2025 a new offence will come into law, the failure to prevent fraud, about organisations being corporately liable for fraud activity. 212 talks about the new policy reflecting the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023 coming into effect in September 2025. And then page 226 has the action of evaluate the impact of that bill by September 2025, which is when the law comes into effect. That feels like an extremely tight time frame for us to have evaluated the impact of a 2023 bill by the month it comes into effect. I assume that we've done more upfront than that. I assume we have some level of assurance or whatever already, but is that action to be completed by September, or is it to be completed further ahead so that we can implement anything we need to implement by September?
I take your point that it will be completed by the time the legislation takes effect. Government released guidance on the new legislation in November last year, so we've had a bit of time to look at it, and yes, we will be prepared.
And just to add that, I mean, York does invest in its counter-fraud measures. Not all councils do that. So I think York's probably already in a good place. So the amount of work is probably, we need to make sure that there are some things that are done, but the amount of work is probably less here than perhaps other places.
Yeah, I think that's fair from what I understand of the local and national situation. I guess my question is, at what point will we have done the level of assurance we need to know what that action plan looks like for what we have to get in place by September, so that we as an audit and governance committee, or more broadly the council, can be assured we are going to be okay by September? When will we have completed whatever level of assurance we need?
We can report back if the committee would welcome that, in terms of, you know, where we are and what more needs to be done.
Yeah, I was thinking ahead of September was is July going to be a doable timeframe or not?
We can July, yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coles.
Just to pick up on the discussion we were having earlier when we were looking at polling stations, really. electoral fraud is not on this list, presumably because you're not worried about it and you don't think it happens. I'm just wondering at what point things that are not a risk are also things that are worthy of a mention, as in, it's not a concern, it is a concern to us, the fraud is not a concern to us, but the impact of people thinking that there is fraud is a concern to us because it means that we get other measures introduced that then have a knock-on effect on democracy. So I suppose it's just a challenge really to reflect on things that are also not a risk that other places or other people might think are risks, and to provide that reassurance around things that some people might be concerned about, but actually you are not concerned about those things. And so therefore it's also worth including. Does that make sense? I'm asking you to kind of say and prove a negative if you like, but if you're not worried about it, it's useful to also know. Thanks.
Have a word on this.
So just on the subject of electoral fraud, I suspect that one of the reasons that it's not on Jonathan's list is because it's not actually for us to investigate. Because electoral fraud is a criminal matter, it all falls within the remit of North Yorkshire Police, you'll be delighted to know. And they have a specific unit that will deal with the issues of electoral fraud. I think the reality that we see is that there are so few cases of electoral fraud brought forwards to the courts that either it is significantly underreported and under-investigated, or it isn't a massive issue. But that's not to minimise the potential that exists.
That's a person.
Raised this before, and I think I saw something. I certainly read something about it being followed up, and I don't think it was under your remit at that point, but it was about business rates, and several, well, at least one big developer, I think went bankrupt, owing massive amount of business rates. Now I know that it goes to government and then comes back to the city and wasn't under your remit, but has anything happened about that? Because I did ask about it.
We did send a briefing note around the committee to the last.
That's yes.
Yeah.
What was it? Could you remind me what the outcome of that was?
The outcome of they went bankrupt, we had to write off the debt as uncollectible.
Yes, but it had built up, hasn't it, over several years? It wasn't just 1 year's worth of.
The liability for business rates is set by the Valuation Office agency, so it's not the council that is an agent, is a collection agent for government, for the business rates that we collect on behalf of the government.
Yes, but we would get something back, and had they paid it, there's nothing we can do about that.
No, I can recirculate the briefing note if you.
Yes, I knew I'd read something about it. Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't fraud as such. It was it was a business that went bankrupt.
Yes.
So it wasn't a fraudulent kind of business rates issue or anything like that. It was a legitimate business that went bankrupt.
Yes. It's just that a resident came to me in my ward and raised this as an issue because they felt that the money hadn't been collected for more than a year. So it was something that was raised with me, and it has stuck with me because it was a lot of money.
We went through a normal debt collection process. We were chasing them, we took them to court. But as I'm sure you're aware, if somebody doesn't want to pay, it's very difficult to make them pay. We're not the landlord, so we couldn't evict them because it wasn't a building that we owned. Obviously, if it had been a building that we owned and they weren't paying the business rates, they weren't paying the rent, you can evict them, but it wasn't a business, it wasn't a premise that we owned. So we've got very limited powers as to what we can do to businesses that they don't pay, fortunately.
Maybe needs tightening up, doesn't it? But I mean, I just wondered because it's something that was raised with me, and I keep,
Okay. Can't see any further questions at that point. We did have a question earlier on about the status of the sort of contract management report. Wonder whether, very briefly, if you could give us just a quick idea of where we are.
So Connor might correct me, but my understanding is that we've struggled to progress the audit, and it's tied up with the implementation of the new Procurement Act. The people we need to talk to have been heavily involved in making sure that the new Procurement Act is properly rolled out within the council. So they've prioritised that rather than supporting the audit. But we understand that. I mean, it's clearly a priority for them.
Okay, do we have an idea of when that might clear up? Okay.
For the microphone, 2 to 3 months, because it has to start from the beginning again, effectively.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any, yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, if we move on then to the item 11, Audit and Governance Committee Work Plan. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, actually, we missed the question around notifications to older people as well in the agenda, so we can get an email round about action.
I can provide an update if you will, but I caught up with Lindsay as she was on the way out. So because we're organising the annual meeting now, that will automatically involve notifying all of the aldermen and alderwomen. So as part of that, we will then provide them with the full schedule of meetings, and they'll have that schedule then for the next municipal year.
Thanks. A work plan item. So Audit and Governance Committee review of effectiveness. A brief background: we had the scrutiny scores come back to CSC CSMC last week. Scored at 2.1 out of 5. Our, depending on how you count it, rough score for ANG was about 3.29 out of 5. So better than average broadly, but not amazing. The action plan said it was going to be reported in January. We just got them circulated. It's not listed in the work plan. So my issue with having it on the work plan is that I actually think it is part of the same conversation piece of scrutiny. Some of the things that we do in ANG, actually, we are doing a bit of scrutiny here when we shouldn't be. There's budget scrutiny was one of the big things that came up in the scrutiny side of things, as well as corporate scrutiny, obviously being its own entity that can bleed into what we're doing here. But I think that the gist of the scrutiny improvements is that it should take some pressure off ANG, including some of those discussions around finance throughout the year. And it also is heavily leaning into better task and finish groups, which is something we've talked about in the past here. For example, the procurement issues, procurement task and finish was one that was proposed by CSC CSMC. So I guess my question is, I think it should come back to us as on the work plan anyway, but could we have the chair ensuring the ANG side of that is considered within scrutiny review, if there's a working group that is, and what the impact on us is considered, as opposed to they do a whole thing and then afterwards we then try and then fix something after the fact once that's all locked into place. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but if we can have a summary of that, perhaps as a paper for information and discussion to next ANG, that might be a better way of doing it than just trying to do it all within ourselves.
Yeah, we can. I mean, we certainly bring a summary back to the next ANG. As for feeding it into how scrutiny changes come along, well, obviously the scrutiny review has been through scrutiny itself and through executive. It will be going to council in a week and a bit or so. So we can feed it into what comes out of that and the new way of working for scrutiny, and make sure that we try and dovetail things together so that scrutiny looks at scrutiny topics. This committee looks at the audit and governance side of matters, and ne'er the twain shall meet, so to speak. We don't end up with that bleed over of you doing scrutiny and them doing auditing work.
Yeah, I guess the specifics of if we were having a no purchase order, no pay deep dive, but there's also a task and finish group for corporate that's looking into the same space. I think there probably is overlap. So on the one hand, I agree that we should have a clear delineation between the audit and governance piece versus the scrutiny, but then you also do have to have scrutiny of budget and scrutiny of governance. So I just think it's making sure that we've got that ironed out as part of this process. What we get voted through next week is going to be that we want some changes in fewer committees, assuming that the vote goes through. But the specifics of how it works, I think, is where the impact on ANG will be more fleshed out. And that, as far as I understand it, is through a working group specifically looking at scrutiny. So I just wanted to make sure ANG is something they're looking at, if assuming the committee's happy with that.
Yeah, and I think it's explicit in the scrutiny review that it's a kind of we're going to see how this goes for a year and then take stock. So over that period, we can see how the two interact and, you know, if things are better or if other changes need making. And then obviously at the end of that year, you've got, you know, there's a point at which you can take a view, I think. Next one.
Yeah, so I guess suggestion that is on our work plan for next meeting, but between now and there's other stuff happening offline. Salvo Army contract audits, that whole piece around the management and that contract sounds like a 2 to 3 months means July at the earliest. I think the earliest would be preferable. This has been going on for a long time with lots of gaps. The other one we had, Action 74 around FOI themes, doesn't have any timeline on it either. I don't know if that's something sooner or later. We didn't bring it up on the action list, but it is supposed to be coming back at some point. That I think it's split into two, that action with half already being completed.
We can certainly look at that. I'll take that away and ask Lorraine to have a look, see what she can produce as a matter of urgency.
Yeah, just no idea of when that time is. I don't think it's critical that we know what the themes of the FOI requests are in a timely fashion, because there's a major concern that we need it in a time frame, but it's just to make sure it doesn't drop off, and it'd be good. And we just had that conversation about the counter fraud plan for the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023 failure to prevent fraud legislation. It's talking about that being in July if possible as well, ahead of it coming into full force legally in September, which does put quite a lot into July. But
I will note with the July, we obviously, as the work plan says, the date is to change. So originally it was scheduled for the 8th. It was then moved to the 14th. We're going to need to look for another date yet. So maybe July, it might be early August, depending on availability and what we do. But you know, we'll accommodate as we can.
yeah, I mean, assuming it doesn't go into like early June, I assume that time frame will work for all the reports we've got going on. And assuming it doesn't slip into September, then it should give us time to address anything for the legislation.
So it can't be earlier than the beginning of July, because one of the key items on there is the accounts, and they won't be completed until the end of June. So that's one of the problems with having it originally scheduled on the 8th, that the papers would be published before the accounts were finalised. So Debbie's good, but not necessarily psychic.
And then I only have one other thing, which wasn't a work plan specific thing, but pretty much every committee drags the Director of Finance along, who's still with us at the bitter end, almost 8 o'clock, after doing a full day job that is quite important for the council. But actually, we often have that situation where we have one senior sat in the corner for 5 items on the agenda, while we're talking about a few houses on Beckfield Lane or whatever it might be. So I just wanted to suggest that's something for us to take away in general as A&G, and to look at that from a governance in other committees. The ordering of agenda items, I think everyone tries to work out whether we should have the big meaty item up front or put it at the end so it's got more space to breathe. But I think we should also take into consideration the seniority and time of officers, particularly if the officers are on 6 committees in 2 weeks, which is quite a lot of evening commitments that bleeds into their personal life.
So one of the things that Debbie and I are trying to organise is so that we have effectively one of these committees that's more finance focused and one of them is more governance focused. So we alternate between the two, which gives both of us a little bit of a step back from attendance.
Good luck with that if they're halving the number of meetings, is all I'll say. But I appreciate and applaud the effort. But yeah, whatever we can do to help at least move the right things earlier to reduce the pain for the people who repeatedly do it, I think would be useful.
I mean, I think that's fair, but it's one of those impossible things, isn't it? I think all we can do is when there are requests from specific officers to go first, they're always actions. I think it's encouraging people to say, but I tend to think that senior officers are the ones that should stick around and the junior officers are the ones that should go first and get off. But you could look at it either way. So the only points I'd have, but I think, we take the point, and I think there's an effort, I guess, to address that. And then it's just encouraging, I guess, a sensible conversation about the order of items. I I don't know, do we pay Veritel to sit there for them? So, you know, if we don't pay them, they can stay there as long as.
I'm not suggesting that other people don't have important critical roles, etc. It's more specifically about the people who have to come back time and time again and sit through 4 items before they get to their one multiple times a week in a short space of time. So it's just bearing that in mind and making sure we're considering it when we're putting agendas together.
No, that's fair enough. Okay, I guess the only 2 points, so I can only think of one at the moment, is obviously on the contract management report. I guess what pressure can we bring to get that done now, because it's been dragging on since October 23 was when we asked for something on it, and obviously we're now into March. We're looking at another 3 months. It won't be 3 months, it'll be further past then. There comes a point where it's a bit like the sort of COVID inquiry, isn't it? It's now been so long since COVID that everybody's able to say it's been so long since COVID, why are we worrying about it now, when actually we do need to get around to those issues that were causing problems. So I think
I can certainly pick that up with Veritel and look to perhaps suggest that we might like to schedule it in for the May meeting, which may give a degree of impetus for them to either turn up with a report or turn up and explain why they haven't done the report, but at least they're then having to set that out clearly.
I mean, obviously the longer it gets, you know, key officers will have moved on and changed roles and things. So I think any pressure we can bring to move that forward would be good. Trying to remember what my other point was, so I can't remember. No. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, perhaps we could add to the upcoming items open data strategy. If perhaps someone in the meantime then can talk to Ian and see if there's any possible, if he can firm up on a date at this stage. But
I think, Chair,
So
there just needs to be a distinction between what you're interested in and what the committee is here to look at, if I could say it in those words. So you may well be interested in it. I'm not entirely sure that Audit and Governance Committee is the right place to discuss a data strategy.
I was going to say, is that more scrutiny?
That perhaps comes back to exactly to the point that we were making about what's audit, what's scrutiny, and I think that's probably closer to a scrutiny topic than an audit and governance report.
We perhaps refer that to CSMC to think about whether they'd like to.
I've taken the action away that we need a data strategy, and I'll work with Ian on that, and then we'll need to speak about it and how long it might take us, and then we can sort of certainly feed back through the actions to let you know that it's done and where it's gone, so that you can track it through in other committees. But it's probably not one for the work plan, I would suggest.
Okay, anything else? No? Okay, I'll close the meeting at that point. There's no urgent business. So thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you.